All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming out here today for this exciting announcement. So we're all going to speak, have something to say here for the big news. So for many of us, when we think about police officers responding to a call, we think about officers making arrests and dealing with people who committed offenses. But one thing that I certainly have learned working alongside our police officers for 9 years is that police work is so much more than making arrests. One aspect of police work we need to fully recognize and appreciate is the critical work our officers do every day to help victims of crime. And in many cases, victims are people who've frequently had their lives turned upside down because they've been robbed, they've been assaulted, or had some other type of traumatic experience. And as a result, themselves, and oftentimes their family as well, can face serious physical and psychological health challenges, as well as legal and financial challenges, and often they do that with limited resources. So our police officers are often the first people to encounter crime victims and helping them sort through the difficult moment, and that requires tremendous compassion and tremendous patience, as well as special training and skills. And I can't tell you the number of times when I've been at a crime scene and you'll see the victim, and it's usually, he or she is over there and there's a police officer with their arm around that person saying, "We're going to get through this and we're going to be there for you." And that always makes me really proud to see that side of our police officers' action. Most media doesn't see that. Most people don't think about it. But the big compassionate hearts that we have with LMPD are on full display each and every day. I especially want to thank the Special Victims Unit for the compassion that they show our citizens each and every day in Louisville as well. So this is a big part of the puzzle. And it's a big part of the puzzle when you think about police community legitimacy and how people see the Metro Police Department. So it's critically important that we work with crime victims, because what they can experience in a few moments can affect them for the rest of their lives and obviously can have broader impact on our entire community. Think about all these possibilities. Think about what happens to young kids and the type of things young kids can see, especially at a violent crime scene. These adverse childhood experiences, they're known in the trade as ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Data and science shows that oftentimes later challenges that people have in life, and some of these can be interacting with the law, have their roots in these adverse childhood experiences and the trauma that inflicts on young kids, and then how that affects them. They can show up at kindergarten with PTSD. It hinders their learning and their development from day one. And for many children, they just fall behind and they never catch up. And that's unacceptable, especially when a community can provide more services. So we work to address these issues in a variety of ways. One of that is through our Compassionate Schools project in partnership with JCPS, so kids can learn coping mechanism, mindfulness, compassion, self-love. A lot of times what we see with kids when they're young is, teachers are saying do this or do that, but the kid, in terms of working better with the team, but they don't know how to love themselves to start with. So the Compassionate School Project teaches that type of empathy and self-love, and then self-control that can come with that. Our Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods coordinates our Pivot to Peace initiative. So in that, we work with violent crime victims in the hospital and help them get connected to resources to break the cycle of violence so they can get on a positive path. Our Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Office is also partners with U of L and Centerstone on the Trauma Resilient Community Initiative. So it's a $5 million grant that we received last year, building out a network of trauma-informed care throughout the community. And our Metro Office for Women has partnered with LMPD and JCPS to implement the Trauma-Informed Support Project to provide early intervention and support to students who have been exposed to violence. And our Criminal Justice Commission and our Office for Resilience and Community Services are part of this fight as well. So it takes a big team effort from everybody to pull this off. So a lot of these initiatives that I just mentioned are supported by federal grants and foundation grants that we compete for. My Metro government team and I are really proud that we've brought in tens of millions of dollars in competitive grants since the beginning of my administration. And cities all over the country cities much larger than Louisville are going after these grants, and we keep getting them, and that tells us that we do something right. Oftentimes the feedback we get is that you all as a city work together department to department, agency to agency better than any other city that they work with. So I really appreciate the sense of teamwork and partnership that we have here. It takes great community partners to earn these grants. Partners like County Attorney Michael Connell here, nonprofits like the Center for Women and Families, and the list goes on and on. So I want to thank all of our community partners for helping us achieve this success. So that's a long way of saying that today there's even more validation of our work to become an even more compassionate city. And to announce that, I will turn things over to Chief Conrad. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am so very excited to have an opportunity to stand at this podium and share some exciting news and what I think is really, really good news. One of my long-time goals as chief has been to develop a comprehensive victim services unit so we are in a better position to meet the needs of the victims of violent crime in our community. And today I'm pleased to announce that we've been awarded 3 separate grants, which will allow our staff to grow from 2 full-time advocates to a total of 7. And these will be in addition to the 2 advocates that are already working full-time in our homicide unit. The first grant awarded to us, which is for more than $500,000, is from the Office for Victims of Crime. It's to be used over a 3-year period. It will allow us to hire and pay for 2 victim services specialists. The second grant, which is for more than $120,000, is from the Federal Victims of Crime Act. It will pay for 1 year of continued funding for one of our existing advocates, and it will allow us to hire another advocate as well. The third and final grant, which is for $750,000, is from the Improving Criminal Justice Responses Grant Program. This is a 3-year grant that I'm particularly excited about because it represents a partnership that will be overseen by the Criminal Justice Commission and will involve the Center for Women and Families, the Jefferson County Attorney's Office, and our department. This grant will benefit all 3 of these agencies by allowing us to enhance our victim services, and it also gives our department the ability to hire yet 2 additional advocates. In addition to adding advocates, these grants collectively will give us additional funding, which will allow us to enhance our training. It will provide housing assistance in some cases for victims of violent crime, and it will also allow us to increase our demand reduction efforts that are focused on reducing human trafficking in our community. You know, these are significant investments from our federal and state partners that will really allow us to increase the number of people that we can assist. We're talking about reaching out to people who are the victims of violent domestic cases, violent domestic crime, child physical and sexual abuse cases, sexual assaults, homicides, and other violent crimes that happen all too often to people in our community. And I will tell you, at a time when budget cuts are forcing us to rethink how we operate, and we're still trying to figure out ways to meet the needs of this community, it's truly exciting to have the opportunity to be able to use grant funding to support the advocacy that is so important to the victims of violent crime. This is also a great example of how partnerships can go across government to involve nonprofits and the private sector so we can all work together to leverage limited resources to do the best possible things that we can for the victims of crime in our community. And now I'd like to hand things over to one of our very important partners, our County Attorney, Michael Connell.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Mayor and Chief Conrad. I'm Michael Connell, your Jefferson County Attorney, and first, I'd like to say thank you to all the partners that are in the room and everyone up here that we've worked with to curb domestic violence in our community. Mayor Fisher and Congressman Yarmouth, Chief Conrad and the men and women of LMPD, Elizabeth and her staff, Faith Augustin, and the Louisville Metro Criminal Justice Commission, and Councilwoman Barbara Sexton Smith. As you heard from the mayor and the chief, there are a number of meaningful grants we are announcing today, and I have one more to add to that list. My office has also received an award from the National Victims of Crime Act, or VOCA as we say. It's $176,185. This award is the largest VOCA award in the history of the Jefferson County Attorney's Office. I might pause here for a second as I listen to the mayor and the chief and talk about, we stand before you and the cameras and people taking this down and wondering what this is about. And it's about money. It's about money, that hard work by people in these various offices who have to do professional grant writing and to convince people and to persuade people that our community needs these funds because we don't get it from anywhere else. We can't raise it any other way, and that's been shown in many ways. So this is very, very important to this community. Our VOCA grant funds 3 victim advocates who work out of our 24-hour domestic violence intake center, which is located, as many of you know, in the Hall of Justice, and provides vital support functions like the cost of interpreter services, among other things. The sole focus of one of our VOCA-funded advocates is victims at the highest risk of deadly abuse, highest risk for lethality, as it's called in the domestic violence business. Our DV Intake Center is so important because it gives victims a place to get help for immediate legal action, like taking out an emergency protective order. These 4 grants that we're talking about here today total $1.56 million for local government partners to help end domestic abuse. I think that is something we can and should all celebrate with respect to this horrible offense that goes on in our community more often than it should, and especially in large urban areas. The favorite, or my most, I guess, powerful quote that I've ever read about domestic violence was from someone who did a study and some years ago, and she said this, and I've used this before, shared it before: the exercise of male power in its crassest form, is physical violence in the family setting. I mean, it doesn't come any more direct, and it doesn't become any more real than what I just read from that study. We must find ways as partner agencies to leverage our work together and seek additional funding in the face of budget shortages, which I've just alluded to. Only through partnerships like these can Louisville fully support victims throughout their journeys as survivors. I'll offer you just a few numbers to show the magnitude of this issue here in Louisville before turning things over to Congressman Yarmouth. My office operates 2 specialized prosecution units, the DUI, driving under the influence unit, and domestic violence unit. That's the commitment we show to these highly technical cases that can mean life or death for people in Jefferson County. Now, when I begin this next paragraph by saying I'm proud, let me put that in quotes. I'm proud to say that in 2018, our DV unit prosecuted 3,858 domestic violence and sexual assault cases, earning higher than a 90% conviction rate. That's a, quote, proud statement from my office because it's hard to take pride. I take pride in the work our people do, but it's hard to, being a public official, to stand up and say we're proud that we had 3,858 cases of domestic violence and sexual assault that our office handled. But that's the fact of it. Is if you do the math, the quick math, you'll see that's over 300 a month. 300 a month that come through the office. Nearly 40 members of my staff focus every day on issues related to domestic violence. A number of them are here today. I have Ingrid Geiser, Jeff Metzmeyer, Ann Dyke. Ingrid is the head of our criminal division. Jeff runs the Domestic Violence Intake Center on a daily basis, and Ann Dyke is the supervisor of our domestic violence unit. And I'd like to thank them and our whole team for their services. Our DV prosecutors cannot achieve a 90+% conviction rate without supporting victims when they first seek help, setting the stage for successful prosecutions. And that's where places like the Center for Women and Families and our Intake Center come in. And with that, I'll turn this over to my friend who is particularly busy these days in Washington, between his duties as chairman of the House Budget Committee and still as a still relatively new grandfather. And I'd like to introduce to you our hardworking Congressman John Yarmouth.
Thank you, Michael. Along with an even newer grandfather here, Mayor Fisher, was excited about that as well. Having done a lot of these events, you know if you're down the row of speakers a little bit, it's one of those situations in which everything has been said, but not everybody has said it. And so I get to say some of the same things, and I'm really not going to do that. But this truly is a very important day for this community and for the victims of violence among us. I'm only going to add two things. One is to emphasize one point that the mayor made. These grants are earned. They are not just given. The day has passed, unfortunately, when we had earmarks and we could just dispense money just because we wanted to. These grants are very, very competitive. There are people all over the country, virtually every jurisdiction is competing for them. So I think all of the people here should take great pride in the fact that these grants have been made. Secondly, to segue off of something that Michael said, I had an opportunity a few years ago to go to a court and sit there in the morning while everybody came through and was arraigned. And it was a fascinating experience. But before all the accused came forward, the judge was signing emergency protective orders. And there were more than 90 that she signed. And I said, how long a period is that for? And she said, today. When you think about that, almost 100 emergency protective orders in one day in this community, and you understand the magnitude of this problem. We've always understood that protecting our citizens was a very, very primary responsibility of government at all levels, and we understand that the police force is going out and trying to prevent crime and also to apprehend criminals. But the third piece of the puzzle is really to assist in trying to make the victims' lives as whole as possible after the crime, and these grants will go a long way to doing that. And that's another perfect segue to introducing Elizabeth from Center for Women and Families, because no organization in this community knows more about the toll of violence on our citizens and about the necessity for these programs that assist victims of crime. And the Center for Women and Families has been doing a phenomenal job for years in putting these lives back together. So Elizabeth, come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. The Center for Women and Families is grateful more resources will soon be available to victims of sexual violence, domestic violence, and human trafficking. Sexual violence, domestic violence, and human trafficking is not a Center for Women and Families problem. It's not an LMPD problem or a county attorney's office problem. It is our community's problem. We must work together to support victims in need and mitigate the impact of trauma. There's simply no way that just one agency can serve the needs of all of our neighborhoods. In the face of funding cuts from other sources, we have been doing all that we can to collaborate with organizations and agencies and partners across the city to take care of victims' needs. The Center for Women and Families has a long-standing positive relationship with LMPD, the county attorney's office. And we know from experience that it takes all of us to be able to serve our victims' needs and all of those in our community. As we continue to look forward to the future, we are committed to strengthening and enhancing evidence-based programming, survivor-defined successes, and community partners. The grants that we are receiving will allow for additional training and resources that will help us accomplish this. The center will continue and always will serve victims 24/7, 365 days a year. And we are really, really excited about these additional resources to help us serve more victims in additional ways. And now I'd like to turn it over to the fabulous Councilwoman Barbara Sexton-Smith.
Yes, thank you. I'm Councilwoman Barbara Sexton-Smith representing the 4th District, and it is such an honor to serve not just the folks in the 4th District, but the folks from all over this region. And Chief, during my first 3 years in office, I've had the pleasure of working with 4 of the LMPD divisions. That would be the 1st, the 2nd, the 4th, and the 5th, because all of those run through my district. So I get to see on a day-to-day basis just how critically important it is to have the resources available for the men and women of LMPD who are either out on the streets, working those beats, working in the headquarter buildings, working in special services and all the other departments, especially that department that helps those victims of violent crime. You know, it's a great thing, Mayor, to be here today and get to celebrate $1.5+ million, because we know so well how important every dollar is and how hard everyone works to garner all the resources we possibly can. My message today is to say, just remember, behind every dollar and behind every data point and behind every piece of evidence, there is a human being, a person whose life is possibly hanging on by a mere thread. As a person who has been a victim of violent crime in my own life, I know what it's like to lie there on the floor in a pool of blood and wondering who's going to show up. I remember, it was a long time ago, but the very first person to show up was wearing that uniform many, many years ago, close to 40 years ago at this time, Mayor, and it was a police officer that showed up to hold my hand and to guide me through that and give me the confidence, not just to get up, but to get up, to go to the hospital, come out of the hospital, and go right back into that place where that violent crime took place and do it with confidence. And so behind every data point and behind every dollar, there is a real person. So my message to all the men and women working together, and Elizabeth, with your fine team over at the Center for Women and Families, is that I want each of you to do what Shakespeare taught us oh so well. When you meet those victims, grapple them to your soul with hoops of steel and love them and care for them. And if you're a victim of violent crime and domestic abuse and all forms of violence and human trafficking, know that all these folks and thousands of folks behind them are standing ready to help you. We're here. We've got additional resources and 7 new folks. And to tell you a little bit more about that, I'd like to introduce the woman who's dedicated her life to this, Nicole Carroll. Nicole, would you please join me?
Thank you. That's a tough act to follow. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for being here. As previously mentioned, my name is Nicole Carroll, and I am the Director of the Victim Services Unit for the Louisville Metro Police Department. The Victim Services Unit was created in 2016 and only had the ability to serve victims of adult sexual assault. The receipt of the grants mentioned by Chief Conrad will allow the Victim Services Unit to expand its capacity in order to better serve the citizens of Louisville by employing 6 victim services specialists. It is the goal of the unit to be at the forefront of advocacy and to be an example for the entire state. Violent crime has the potential to change the course of a person's life. And as we all know, crime impacts victims, witnesses, families, and entire communities. The unit supports crime victims and witnesses by helping them navigate the criminal justice system and by responding to their emotional, physical, and financial needs. I am excited to share with you all the improvements that have been made to the unit through the acquisition of these grants. The expansion of the unit will allow specialists to respond to incidents in order to provide immediate crisis intervention and support, help victims devise safety plans to include safe temporary housing, help victims assist victims with filing victim compensation claims, provide court accompaniment, coordinate interpreter or translation services, provide investigative updates, intervene with employers, academic institutions, creditors, service providers, and landlords, and provide resources and referrals to organizations that can meet the unique needs of crime victims. These expanded services will be available to help victims cope with the trauma and aftermath of victimization and to lessen the inconveniences often associated with participation in the criminal justice process. Through the backing of the Office on Violence Against Women, the Office for Victims of Crime, and the Victims of Crime Act, the impact of the support and advocacy services provided by the Victim Services Unit will be far-reaching to the citizens of our community. I am very excited for LMPD to be a leader in victim services provision, and I look forward to working with community partners to best support victims of crime. I'll now open to any questions that you might have.
Chief Conrad, can you talk a little bit about how this specifically affects your budget, and does it give you flexibility in other areas of your department, that sort of thing?
This is something that we've talked about doing. It's been part of the strategic plan, the first one that I was involved in developing when I first got here. We've tried to work this funding into our budget, and we were never able to really do much with that. The best hire that we made in terms of victim services was Nicole. She is the one that works so hard to make these grants happen. And this is something that quite frankly, wouldn't have happened without that kind of leadership. It is budget neutral. We are still going through the constriction process, which is something that I'll be talking to council, or at least the Public Safety Committee of Council here later this week. That is a challenging process for us, and this is the only part of the department that I am proud to say we are adding additional employees.
When the grant money is used up, will you work to still fund those positions?
We absolutely will try, and you know, as time goes on, two of the grants are longer term. One is a 1-year grant. We are continuing to look for resources to try to make that happen. The continuation of the grants is very important. It doesn't always happen, unfortunately, but we will try hard to find the money.
Briefly, can we also clarify the numbers were misstated or either misprinted? It says 3 full-time advocates to 8. And then you had stated 2 to 7.
What we've got, and just to lay it out, we've had 2 advocates. One is a homicide detective whose full-time job is to do advocacy and outreach. We were in a situation where we couldn't find civilians to hire to be able to do that. We couldn't find the funding to be able to do that. So that is one of them that is included. And I talked about a total of 7 new, plus the 2 existing, for a total of 9. Which does reconcile the numbers.
And I guess could you maybe talk about your caseload currently and how you think this might help, and you know, is the demand there for adding these extra positions?
100%. Yes. I will tell you, I just did numbers today. Between myself and Megan Ware, a victim services specialist that was hired in August, we worked 96 cases. That covered adult sexual assault, crimes against children, and domestic violence. And those were only felony domestic violence cases. So that didn't even cover all of the misdemeanors that we get on a daily basis. So, you know, month over month, our numbers are roughly that between the 2 of us. And so there is certainly a need. And the unit is growing and expanding. So I'm in conversation with our traffic unit so that we can work criminal traffic fatalities because there is a need for those crime victims. We're in conversations with robbery. And so we're growing and expanding, but we had to, you know, kind of wait until we had appropriate staffing so that we could properly provide support and advocacy to the victims in our community.